We're going to move on and talk about the food and beverage industry and what they're doing on the E, the S, the G, all the various different components. Please welcome to the stage Takeshi Niinami, who is the CEO of Suntory Holdings. Well, thank you very much for joining us here. First up, and we know everybody's having a lot of conversations across the mountain. What's the big topic that you've been talking about this week?
Talking about U.S.-China relation, and that affects our positioning in Japan, and what to do with the businesses in ASEAN, Asian countries. By the way, what to do then? The second thing we are talking about, maybe Asia is really remote from a conversation on sustainability. But unless Asia is not serious about tackling the sustainability issues, world is not saved. So we're talking to our friends. Don't forget Asia.
Let me ask you about some of the initiatives you've embarked upon in recent times. Plans to achieve 50% reduction in carbon by 2030, net zero by 2050. How do you arrive at these two targets?
Well, definitely we are on schedule as for Scope 1, 2 toward the 2030, but 2050. Everybody is talking about Scope 3, right? And we are now approaching our suppliers, but three categories. One, package, like plastic. Two, logistics, trucks and so forth. And third, food materials. We deal with a lot of farmers indirectly, such as coffee beans, barley, lots of food materials. And that's a huge headache. And we have a strong policy, which is our tradition, a culture of Suntory, should work with any supplier. We should not push out, even though they are small. And if they can't follow, then we should send people to consult with them to follow our policy.
So there's a lot of engagement across the value chain for your company at this point.
Exactly.
Let me ask you about a global standard. One of the big conversations I had here in the forum was talking about a new global standard on non-financial reporting coming. So IFRS is working on something. It'll be here by June, hopefully to address one of the main gripes that companies can simply put out almost a marketing campaign in their non-financial reporting. You talk about offsets as well. Some company reports, I planted some trees, I saved a conservation area, therefore my emissions are lower. But it doesn't really necessarily work like that. The other point that consumers didn't leave their home to go and buy this because it got delivered. So therefore we saved the emissions on transportation. This is just picking and choosing information. To what extent would you welcome seeing a global rule, a global standard on non-financial reporting to get past some of these greenwashing claims?
First of all, that's a matter of how we keep the license to operate, which means how to gain the trust from society as well as the consumers, right? So our first principle is to be honest, which means if we can't do it now, so we just say, we're not doing this, but we will do this by when. And if we can't, sorry, we could not because of this. And so honesty and the transparency is the policy. So that might hurt in the short run, but in the long run, that's a right thing, we believe. That's a policy.
Tell me how your investors are engaging with you on the E, the S, and the G at this point, because it stands out to me here in Europe that you've got very divided investor bases. Same story around the United States. Some investors want the boards, the CEOs to do less on ESG and just focus on profits, particularly in this economic environment. Others want them to do more and are willing to put forward shareholder proposals to the board to encourage more ESG action.
To be honest, we are facing much more headwinds nowadays because of the possible interest rate hike furthermore. Could not happen, but at least that would happen in Japan. So the hurdle rate is going up, and that's pressuring the financial institutions, and that's a pressure. But I think we are taking a strategy such as first of all we are reducing the number of products to enjoy the economy scale. So we do something different than before in terms of dealing with our business. And toward the premiumization, to enjoy more margin, we have to show what we are doing differently from before. because the landscape has changed. Because the inflation is high and still a challenge from global supply chain. So we got to change how to deal with the business.
As you talk about landscape and you look across the competitive field, how much effort right across the industry are we seeing towards solving some of these issues around ESG? If you look at what you're doing versus others, is there a gap, or do you think everybody is moving in lockstep in the food and beverage industry?
I think good news is more alliance across industry. So because we are on the same page toward the sustainability, ESG. So used to be less alliance, but now, because we are talking about the scope 3, so we work together with perhaps competitors. So, and I talked about the alliance last year here, but more activity toward the alliance because of scope 3.
As you talk about hitting some of these targets, just talk to us about the new technologies that you've been deploying that are helping you get to some of the targets quicker.
Well, we've been investing into technology, but this is bad news. We don't know what we are doing is right for the future. So that's why we are raising the radar to work with perhaps our competitors, perhaps our suppliers, to find better technology. But in the meantime, we're investing in technology. But the key thing is how to apply the technology toward the reality. If reality requires us to show certain level of economy. So that's why, again and again, we have to bring more partners to work together for the technology.
Let's put some flesh on the bones and give the audience an idea of some of the initiatives that you're up to. Just explain one of the projects that you've been working on that you're quite proud of at this point.
Plastic. And plastic is a big issue. And in Europe, we've got lots of claims. Why don't you throw away plastics and instead use glasses? But we don't know about that because it depends on countries how we calculate CO2 emissions. And the key thing, we invested in the plastics, technology, recycling technology. And that creates the components of making plastics. And each component, and we create another plastics and the recycling and invested to the biomass technology to create the plastics. So recycling and not going to the fuel-based plastics toward the bio-based technology, plastics. So that will hugely reduce CO2 emissions. So that technology is now going to be used by as many as 50 companies. So, and then we will increase toward 100. I'm talking about Japan. But we want to deploy that technology to ASEAN countries eventually.
Let me just look at this from the other side. What's the role of government policy then in terms of banning specific products or the use of certain materials? Is the stick approach useful here to encourage change?
Well, let's say governments, for example, in Japan, we didn't work with the government. We work with the competitors because of social pressures a lot, and we share the social pressure. And that goes to the other governments like ASEAN countries. Europe, fine. US, but I think ASEAN is so important for us, and China as well. So we are talking through our government of Japan to talk to governments in ASEAN to work together. And because of the geopolitical issue, I think definitely we have to work with the ASEAN countries and eventually perhaps with China as for sustainability technology.
As we talk about ecosystems, what jumps out to me is that if you don't have a green electricity system, a green grid, then the new technologies don't start up in that particular part of the world, they go elsewhere. You need to have an ecosystem that works effectively to bring in new technologies, but allows manufacturers the ability to take down their emissions by using that energy. Just give us a sense of how you've re-geared your use of energy.
Well, first of all, the important factor is net zero, not zero. So over the course of developing new technology like hydrogen, people say it's very costly, but believe me, maybe 10, 20 years, that cost tremendously will go down. So in Asia, including Japan, we still use the gas and perhaps coal, but definitely get rid of CO2 emitted. So that's a huge statement that the net base is so important, and the technology like hydrogen. And plus, perhaps we can talk about nuclear energy too.
How far does your corporate role go in creating the energy systems for the future? I know some companies are investing directly in building their own solar facilities, for instance. We know that there are deep requirements to try and get the energy systems to where we need them to be. Is there a role for companies large as yours to be investing directly in future of energy?
Already, first of all, when we built the new plants, every plant should be under the renewable. So we put the solar panels on the roof, and we just only renewable. That's our policy, and we are shifting renewables for incumbent factories as well. And that's our statement for 2030. And above 2030, even we are working with the suppliers for renewables, and we will support the suppliers toward the renewables toward 2050.
Let me just pivot quickly to the economics here. We're setting up for what looks to be a difficult year. Have you seen any change in consumption patterns yet at all?
Yes. People are toward the more trading down. So, and people is getting to know inflation is to continue. So, and so it's bad news, but I think we will work on by going toward the premiumization and the innovation. So silver lining is still consumers love to see something different, something innovative. So that's the way we have to seek, always innovative. So that means we have to work with the talented people. People is so important.
Let me just follow up on this point, though, about premiumization, because we know a lot of players in the industry have gone upscale, trying to get better margins and going after a certain customer. Is that proving to have been a bad strategy now because investors are trading down, looking for cheaper products?
Well, again, I think cheaper products are now bringing the attraction of consumers. But again, people love innovation too. So it's a strategy of each corporation. And we are not going to follow the trading down, but premiumization. So gross margin is so important. Gross margin means appreciation of consumers, and that means innovation.
And for big fans of your products, what innovation is coming? Can you share anything exciting with us?
Yeah, well, we're working on zero alcohol content. And so that kind of zero is so important, but still premiumization and is so important. So both ends, we are working on innovation.
There's a big market here on day 4 of Davos for zero alcohol drinks. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. Takeshi Niinami, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.